Hi, so today Tegan and I are going to be interviewing Mark Pentleton from Coffee Break Languages. Tegan and I are two of the language ambassadors this year, and so we're just going to do a quick interview. So I'll ask the first question. So Mark, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your job, please?
Absolutely. First of all, delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation to be on your podcast. My name's Mark Pentleton. I am the managing director and founder of Coffee Break Languages. We make language courses and podcasts, and we share our love of language learning with learners all around the world. We've been doing this for some time. I think this is about year 16. We've been doing it for 15 years or thereabouts. We, as I say, we love sharing our love of language learning with a worldwide audience through our podcasts and online courses.
So I suppose the first question is, what languages do you speak and why did you choose they ones?
Well, obviously my native language is English. My mother tongue is English, but I studied French and Italian at school, and then went on to study Spanish and Portuguese in addition to the French and Italian at university. And over time, I've picked up a number of other languages, not to a fluent level necessarily, but I don't actually think it's really vital to be fluent. I think the important thing is that you speak the amount of a language that you need to speak for the particular situation. So I speak some German, I speak some Norwegian, some Swedish, and some Catalan, and a little bit of Chinese, and little bits and pieces of other languages as well that I've picked up along the way.
Wow, that is a lot of languages. I know you already touched on this a little bit, but I think you said that you had learned French and Italian at school. Is that correct?
That's right.
Do you want to maybe expand on it a little bit, kind of like talk about it a bit more?
Yeah,
your
of course.
Experience of it in school.
Yeah, I started when I was at school. We didn't really learn languages in primary school, so I think that's fantastic that the younger learners now are able to get a fantastic experience learning languages in primary. But I started learning French on my first day of first year at St Michael's Academy in Kilwinning, and we started learning French at that point. And I had never done any French before, other than my big sister teaching me a few phrases here and there. When she was learning it, and then went on to I did a crash hire in Italian in fifth year, and my grandmother was actually Italian, although we didn't really use any Italian at home. So I had a little bit of exposure, in a sense, to Italian, and I thought that Italian sounded a lovely language. So that's why I took that up in fifth year. And then I went straight on to university from fifth year, and that's when I continued with doing the languages that I really enjoyed.
So obviously you gave us a very impressive list of all your languages. Which ones would you say were the easiest and the hardest to learn?
Ooh, that is a tricky question. I think the easiest to learn is the language that you're most interested in at any one time, and because you've got this motivation, this natural motivation to learn the language, that comes more easily. I think if you're looking at hard languages, I mean, some languages are known to be harder than others, but again, maybe the hardest one is the one that maybe someone is telling you that you've got to learn. Perhaps it's the language that you're learning, not because you desperately want to learn that language, but perhaps you have to in some way. And I know that learners in school don't necessarily always get the opportunity to learn the exact language that they want. However, even when you're learning a language that's perhaps not your first choice, the process that you're going through in learning that language is helping your brain develop in such a way that it will be ready and willing to learn other languages. In terms of the actual difficulty and ease of a particular language, I've always found that your first language, yes, it's difficult to get your head around this idea that words are mean different things, or that they have different constructions or that the grammar in a particular language. Take German, for example, where you've got to think about cases, and we don't necessarily need to think that much about cases in English, but in German, it's going to change the word. You're going to say something different, or word order in some languages can be really challenging too. And for me, I think probably the most difficult experience I've had learning a language was where I had no reference point for a particular bit of vocabulary. My experience learning different languages until I started doing some Mandarin was really all of in a sense, European languages. So I was more used to languages which were all linked in some way to the Indo-European language families, and therefore they're all linked in some way. The vocabulary is it's like they're all part of the same family. But when I started to look at Mandarin, it's not like you can see, oh yeah, that word sounds like it sounds in French, or it sounds like it sounds in German or whatever. There was no reference point, so I found that really, really difficult. However, Mandarin grammar is actually quite easy. So there's always a balance. There's one aspect of a language that will be more challenging, and then there will be another aspect of the language that's actually much easier than it is in the other languages. So it's all kind of swings and roundabouts, and it depends on your own take on things.
So I suppose moving on from that then, you've obviously told us about the easiness and the difficulty of your languages. What would you say was the most fun to learn, and why?
Again, I think that links to what you're interested in. For me,
Yeah.
I have a love of all things Scandinavian. I have always been interested in travelling around Scandinavia. So I visited Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland and Finland as well, although they're not officially Scandinavian. But I also was really interested in the Scandinavian music. So I think in terms of the most fun language experiences I've had, that's been linked to my enjoyment of the music, or watching Scandi shows on TV and things like that. So the fun that's attached to the things that you do when you're enjoying yourself, your pastimes and so on, when you can link them to the language that you're learning, I think that's also a good way of seeing the motivation behind the language that you're learning, and seeing kind of why you're learning that particular language. It helps to enjoy whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned about how you didn't learn a language in primary school but did in secondary. Do you think it's important that young people learn languages in school?
Yes. For many reasons. For me, another language is a kind of key that opens a door, first of all, to that language and that culture, or the many cultures associated with that language. We can't talk about Spanish culture, because the Spanish language is linked to so many different countries and cultures around the world. Likewise with French and other languages. But it does open it opens your eyes to different ways of thinking, different ways of living, different experiences that you can have through the language. And even again, I totally understand that some young people in schools may not necessarily be wanting to learn language X or Y or Z, but the processes that you go through to learn the language that you're doing in school will be processes that will help your brain develop an ability to not only learn a new language, another language at some point in the future, but also to understand your own language and the way that English works. And that is obviously another really, really useful area of learning. So I think the process of learning a language is much more than just about learning that language. As I said, it's about accessing the culture. It's about opening this new world. It's about understanding other people. And I think there's never been a more important time for us to understand how other people work and live and live their lives. So I think in terms of whether young people should be learning a language in school, I would absolutely say I do think is very important.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I suppose, bearing in mind Brexit, would you say that languages are more or less important nowadays?
It's a tricky question because I think for all the reasons that I've already said, I think asking that kind of question is the same as asking, do you think it's important to learn a musical instrument, given Brexit? Brexit, yes, it's changed a lot of things in the way certain things are working, but it doesn't change your inbuilt interest and your inbuilt desire to be able to travel, to be able to experience other cultures. So for me, it's every bit as important now to learn a language as it was before Brexit. I think that's... learning a language for me is about enriching yourself and enriching your own experience and your own view of the world. So you wouldn't say, there is there's a different government in place, so I'm not going to learn a language anymore. It's not going to change anything about the way I feel about learning and acquiring new skills.
So moving on from your opinions on things, what was your job before you decided to do Coffee Break Languages?
Okay, before I started Coffee Break, I started out as a teacher. I was a secondary teacher in East Renfrewshire, and then I also was involved in schools in Ayrshire. And then I did a project. I got involved in a project in 2000, which was called Partners in Excellence, or PI as we called it. And basically the job was to create a virtual centre of excellence for modern languages across 3 local authorities in Scotland, so East Ayrshire, North Ayrshire and Argyll and Bute. So I worked closely with the languages departments of all the 29 schools in those 3 areas to build a sort of virtual centre of excellence, a virtual languages hub, where we worked with the young people in all of those schools to look at ways in which learning a language could be taken further than in the classroom. So we did things like filmmaking weekends, and we looked at podcasting, obviously. We had a kind of online community, as it were. It was kind of pre-social media days. So we had a website called Language Zone, where everyone, like all the learners in all the 29 schools, had their own avatars, and they were contributing to discussion groups and things like that. So it was early days, but it was giving them an opportunity to see that a language is not just something you do 4 or 5 periods a week. It is a living thing. It's something that can be taken out of the classroom, and it's something that is real and that people just like them use in other areas. Some of the people involved in that project in the different schools were from quite rural schools, where perhaps there were only 1 or 2 people studying a language at later levels in school. So they were able to join a wider community. Again, obviously now that's very different, but this is 20 years ago when social media didn't really exist then, and therefore it was more, well, it did exist, but not quite in the way it exists now. So I did that until 2008, but in 2006 I started in my kind of spare time, at the weekends and the evenings, started thinking about Coffee Break.
So how did you actually get the idea for Coffee Break then?
Within this project, we had been doing a lot of podcasting. We had been looking at the ways in which podcasts could help language learners. Podcasting kind of was invented in 2005, and I immediately saw podcasting as a way, a really, really good tool to allow language learners to benefit from, to share language learning, if you like, with learners. And I thought, back then it was quite geeky in a sense. Podcast, people hadn't really heard of podcasts. Now everyone knows what a podcast is, and everyone's got a podcast. But back then, we were the first beginner Spanish podcast on the whole of iTunes. So we were probably among the first 500 to 1,000 podcasts in the world when we launched Coffee Break Spanish. But we'd already been doing some podcasting in the Partners in Excellence project, so I had realised how useful it was to be able to create audio content, share it with learners, but crucially give the learners the idea that there was something else coming. So they knew that there was a new episode due, and this kind of sort of episodic way of releasing learning was really exciting to me. I thought this was the perfect way of drip feeding content to learners so that they would be able to continue to improve. So at that time we thought, right, okay, my job was changing slightly. My day job was changing because the funding for that project had run out, and I wasn't really as involved with the languages side of things as I had been previously. So I thought, well, what do I want to do to make sure I'm still got a hand in language teaching? So together with a friend and her daughter who wanted to learn Spanish, we decided to put together the idea of a Spanish podcast where I, as the teacher, would be teaching a learner, and so the listeners would be learning along with the learner on the podcast. And we were trying to think of something that would be, friendly, not threatening in a way. It's something that makes it easy to learn a language, something that you can do while you're doing something else. So, why not have a coffee break with a friend? And that gave us the idea of Coffee Break Spanish. So you're learning Spanish on your coffee break, and it all kind of developed from there.
No, it makes a lot of sense in how that comes about. So with the development of podcast technology, is there any ways that you're going to develop Coffee Break?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since then we've gone on to launch Coffee Break French, German, Italian, Chinese, English and Swedish. So we are going to be continuing with all of these. All of the shows, most of the shows are based around ongoing content. So we do content in seasons, and we've got many seasons of the different shows. We plan to add more seasons, so we'll continue to release more content for beginners and intermediate learners and advanced learners in the different languages. But we're also hoping to introduce new languages as well as time goes on. Obviously, podcasts have been a hugely important part of what we do, but we've also extended that out into other areas. So we've done a lot of video work. We've got a very busy and developing YouTube channel. We also have been developing in other areas, online courses where the podcasts are supplemented by additional materials like video content, written content, bonus audio materials, which learners can buy, and all the podcasts obviously are free, but there's the premium content, and that's how we develop as a company. We make our revenue through the sales of the premium content. So we've gone from really just me and a small microphone to a team of around 20, and we work together to put these podcasts together and to develop the new content as time goes on. So hopefully to continue doing more of what we're doing and expanding in different areas too.
Okay, great. So I suppose now we'll maybe ask you a few questions about yourself. The first one being, have you ever lived abroad?
I have. I spent, when I was through my university course, I had to do, like everyone studying languages, I had to do a year studying abroad basically I chose to be an English assistant in a French school. So I lived in the beautiful town of Menton, right in the south of France on the Italian border. It was perfect because it gave me the chance to travel into Italy a lot, and I did a huge amount of travelling when I was living there. But I absolutely loved working in the school and being an English assistant back then. So I spent a year in Menton, and then I also did some time studying in Salamanca in Spain. So again, because Spanish was part of my degree, I spent 4 months, I think, in Salamanca, and also a month in Portugal as well, because that was part of the degree too. So those are the main times that I've spent living abroad, although I've spent shorter periods working in various places over the years.
So would you ever like to live abroad again, or even do like bulk travelling?
Well, I'm hoping that travel is something that we can all get back to doing pretty soon.
Yes.
I adore travelling. I think travelling is just such a luxury to be able to visit other countries, to see how other places work. I think right now one of the things I'm missing most is actually using the languages that I have learned, and not necessarily. I mean, I use them every day because we constantly are recording new content. We're working with people from lots of different countries, so I literally use most of the languages that I speak every day. But using them in that kind of sort of a day-to-day basis of if you're staying in a hotel, going down to breakfast, interacting with people in that sense, or in shops and so on. I miss that experience so much. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get travelling soon again, and I would love to think that we'll be able to spend some time, some longer time abroad, because I think it's great being able to visit different places, but it's only really when you're in any one place for a significant amount of time that you actually begin to understand it more and to feel part of what's going on there.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty clear to see how passionate you are about languages. So if you hadn't have studied languages at school, or you maybe hadn't have followed it up, where do you think that you would be today?
It's a really tricky question. Another great love of mine is music. I learned piano from the age of 4, and so I think I would probably be involved in music in some way, probably teaching. I taught piano for a number of years as well, all the way through uni, and I think probably I would have gone down a teaching route. I do sometimes wonder, had I gone down that route, would I also have thought, okay, maybe we could do like music podcasts, and if the time had gone in a kind of parallel way, would I be doing music online courses, and would I have a music YouTube site or something like that about teaching music, teaching piano, teaching music theory or something like that. But I think I probably would be doing something like that in some way involving music.
So if we to think of normal times, where do you think you would see yourself in the next kind of 5 to 10 years if things do go back to normal?
When things go back to normal,
When?
As I said earlier, I think we're hoping to continue to develop what we're doing in a professional sense, looking at developing new content, looking at new areas as well. We've got a number of new projects that I can't reveal, but that are on in development at the moment. And so one of them in particular, I think, is a big area for us, and I would love to see that developing. As I think, I'm sorry, I can't tell you more about that. But I think also in 5 to 10 years, I would like to think that I would have been able to have done some further travel and seen more places and visited more places. Probably also maybe trying to work a little less by that time and start to think about taking a little more time to do the things I love doing in addition to learning languages and so on.
So our last couple of questions, is there any advice that you would give to young people who are quite reluctant to learn foreign languages?
Yeah, look for something that really does interest you in that language. So when I was at school and at university, trying to find information, material, stuff to read in the language that I was actually interested in. I remember we did this, our first reading comprehension at university was this really sort of gruesome story about a murder in the south of France. And it was in the papers at the time, and it was really quite horrible for that to be the first thing that we were facing at university. But texts of different types of content were just so few and far between back then. We would have to kind of buy a 2-day-old newspaper in order to get relatively up-to-date French, if that makes sense. Now you can switch on your phone and get anything about any topic about in any language you want. So if you are learning French or learning German or learning Italian or whatever language you're learning, and you're maybe a little reluctant about that, then why not try to find some content that you are interested in, but that just happens to be in French. You might not understand it all, but you will begin to become more familiar with the sounds of the language, and you'll recognise words here and there. You can look in Netflix to get shows, and there's some really, really funny and exciting and interesting shows on Netflix, or follow French or German or Italian TikTokers or whatever, and try to find the kind of content that you like just in the other language. And that will help. First of all, you see that that there are people just like you who might be equally reluctant to learn English, who are living their life in the other language. And then secondly, obviously, you might actually enjoy the content. So definitely look up some stuff that will entertain you.
So for our last question, more particularly for leavers, obviously you studied languages at university. Is there any advice you would give to university students that are doing languages?
Yes, two things. The first thing is the same as what I just said. Read. Read as much as you possibly can. It doesn't need to be novels or poetry or plays or whatever. Read stuff that you're interested in. Find articles online and blogs and news sites and everything where you can read in the language about the topics that you're interested in. And when you are reading, try to... The more you consume in that sense, the more you see, the more times you see a word or a phrase or a particular construction, try to let that sink in. Try to identify and recognise those constructions, because the more time you see it, then the more times you're going to become more confident being able to like replicate that. The other bit of advice is not meant to sound negative, but I think the main thing here would be recognise and understand that it's actually quite hard to learn a language. And although it's hard, and although it's a long process, it's not something that you just, you turn on and one day you can't do it and the next day you can. Recognise that length of time is important and is worthwhile, because although it is a long process to learn a language, it's such a rewarding process. And also, like even in the first day of learning a new language, if you said the phrase or the words or whatever that you learned in that very first day to a native speaker of the language, they would be delighted. They would be impressed at you taking the time and the effort to learn. And every little bit of learning that you go through, you get better at it. The longer you put in, the more time you put in, the better you get at it. I heard someone talking once about their daughter had just started learning the violin, and the first notes that she was getting out the violin were a little bit screechy and a little bit unpleasant to listen to. But the first words that you learn in a language are never unpleasant. It's never unpleasant to hear someone using the language that they're learning. So you know that from day one, the minute you start learning, everything is going in the right direction. So accept that it's going to take some time, but stick at it, because it is the most rewarding thing I think you'll ever do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you on behalf of everyone here, and also thank you to Miss McNeish for organising this. It's been great getting to know you and also about Coffee Break Languages. So again, thank you so much for coming on the interview with us.
Not at all. Thank you. I'm delighted to have been able to take part. Thanks very much, and best wishes to you all.
Thanks.